Let me just ask you about the whole concept of burden. There seems to be, maybe more so than ever before, this idea of burden. Everybody's a burden. You're a burden, this one's a burden, everything's a burden. Was it always seen that way, or is that a reaction to this kind of a culture of comfort?
Well, I just think it's a function of materialism myself. Essentially, Doug, you know, Gabriel Marcel, a great French philosopher, put it this way. You can either look at a human being as a mystery, that is to say, with a transcendent soul, with unique goodness and lovability, right, with the you know, transcendent purpose of being joined to God in perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and home, or you can look at a human being as a problem. You can look at a human being as a thing. And of course, the materialistic viewpoint in history has always led to the idea that people are problems. I mean, you know, I know that, you know, the old proverb, everything gets reduced to the Nazi era, but they so well represent it. But so did Rome. I mean, Rome was a materialistic culture, and we see, you know, the byproduct. You know, Stalinism was a materialistic culture. We see the byproduct. Because the minute you really believe that human beings are nothing more than atoms and molecules, that they don't have a transcendent soul, they don't have transcendent dignity, they don't have unique goodness or lovability, all they are is a bunch of atoms and molecules, all they are is material, then you can expend them, use them any way you want. I mean, materialism, we're talking about metaphysical materialism, you're not necessarily ethical materialism, though metaphysical materialism always leads to ethical materialism, but it also leads to treating human beings like a problem. Notice how Marx easily flows from treating, you know, Marx never treated human beings with rights. In fact, there is no rights vocabulary at all in Marxist, you know, ideology and in Marxist writings, because they don't believe in the individual dignity of every human being that causes rights vocabulary to come forth. So what winds up happening is you get to this idea of people are social units, people are economic units. And when people are social units and economic units, if they are disadvantageous social units and economic units, then they're problems. And of course, they're burdens. Burdens to whom? To the society. And suddenly, the individual rights, that is to say, the right of every individual human being gets subordinated to the so-called common good. And when you don't have equivalence of individual rights in the common good, if individual rights don't stand independently of the common good but are subordinated to the common good, you have nothing more than totalitarianism. It doesn't matter what kind of totalitarianism you have. Nazi totalitarianism, Khmer Rouge totalitarianism, Stalinist totalitarianism, Marxist totalitarianism. You know, everybody is treated like a social unit, an economic unit, and a burden. Now look at the rhetoric that we're getting out of some of our very elitist politicians and social theorists, you know, today. And even some of our media people. They unwittingly are literally subordinating individual rights to the common good, and they're unwittingly treating people like burdens and problems, social units and economic units. And of course, the Catholic Church has always adamantly and staunchly resisted this since the time of Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum, the first social encyclical, which demanded the individual dignity of every human being that rests not only on their transphysical soul and their dignity before God, but on their unique goodness and lovability in the eyes of the Creator. And that has been our position. It's the only position that will protect humanity, civilization, and humaneness. All totalitarian viewpoints wind up imploding because they will, treating some groups as problems, they will undermine themselves. They are nothing more than regimes that try to justify, writ large, justify that the end, namely the common good, justifies the means. We gotta kill a few million people to get to this great economic objective, right? Maoist, you know, cultural philosophy, the great leap forward. We're just gonna, oh, you know, millions are gonna die when you bring all those people into a rural environment, the Khmer Rouge, right? Oh, it's okay. The end justifies the means, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the kinds of things that absolutely have to be avoided. The idea of people as burden, the idea of people as problems, the reversal of the idea that comes from religion, that people are mysteries, individual, intrinsically dignified, unique human beings with a supernatural soul, destined for life in God, in perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and home. The minute we lose that, the minute we lose the religious perspective, don't think for a moment the secular perspective with its grand ideals of the common good are going to protect you. It'll come to nothing more than a Marxist totalitarianism with the butcheries of Stalin that lie at the end of the day. And so, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we have to just look at the wisdom of the great political philosophers, and above all, the wisdom of our religion that has protected it in the great Leo XIII and so many other pontiffs who have followed in the recognition of this prioritization.
I was wondering, I'm just listening to you to talk about that. One of the things that concerns me sometimes, we talk about the environment, we talk about being good stewards of the earth, and all of that is obviously an obligation. The bishops even talk about that in the sense of what's important. The Holy Father certainly has. But sometimes deep behind some of this is population control. Deep behind it in some of these organizations out there, at the end of the day, what they're really saying is too many people are the problem.
Yep. You really have to listen. Yes. Again, Doug, you absolutely have to listen to the means that they're willing to use. The great St. Augustine gave us that principle: the end does not justify the means. And it has been such an important part, not only of individuated ethics throughout the centuries, but such an important part of the development of culture, and certainly in the West and in missionary countries where this principle has been, spoken of. So the idea then that, we can use any means to get to the end of environmental stewardship. Pope Francis has been very, very leery of those kinds of efforts, because if you start saying the problem is people, then automatically you've got the materialist viewpoint. People are problems all over again. People are nothing more than social units, economic units all over again. And not only do you have the philosophy that undermines the very dignity of every individual human person and their rights, but you also have a very, very unenlightened viewpoint of economics, social theory, and economic development. Look, I mean, we've got to face facts here. Malthus is just dead wrong. And anybody who, remember Malthus?
Right, sure.
There's so-called Malthusian theory, right? And he proposed that there's a limited amount of resources, right?
Did
and
some
because
good
there's
work
a
on
limited
Ireland
amount of resources.
Right.
Exactly. There's a
potato famine and everything else. Yes, right.
Yeah, he says, there's going to be an unlimited amount of wants, so you're going to have wars. But we've never found that. Technology has always intervened. Human creativity has always intervened. We've never gotten to a point where we have outrun the resources that we need to feed the world. All we need is to take advantage of the technologies that we have at any point in time, to take advantage of new technologies, whether that might be fusion in the future. And it's coming. There's no doubt you're going to have cheap and clean energy. It's coming in the future. Solar and wind will be there, but it'll be an adjunct, I believe, to fusion in the future. You're going to have farms, vertical farms, and I know people who are developing these vertical farms right now. They're like literally 10 miles by 10 miles, and they're 25 stores, and it just produces like 100 times to 1,000 times more food per acre, right, without using soil-based, it's hydroponically based, it's computerized, all the light waves are simulated to make for the most amount of growth. You can get sometimes 10 crops in a single year, etc. What's my point? Technology is there. We're going to be able to use it. Population is not the problem. We'll be able to feed the population. We'll be able to house the population. We'll be able to communicate with the population. There's an interesting book that was put out. It's called Unlimited Wealth. Boy, this guy's name is going to slip my mind for just a second. But you just look up that book, Unlimited Wealth, where he actually talks about technology as the X factor that interrupts what's called Malthus's theory of unlimited wants plus scarce resources is going to equal wars and famines. Just doesn't work that way. It's just oversimplified.